documents and specific data. The second condition is that that analysis needs to be conducted on the reality. In other words, not as per the text of the law, not as per the theory, but as per the facts of how that judiciary functions in that country. And the third condition is that that analysis needs to be comprehensive. In other words, it needs to exhaust all the sources out there, and it needs to look at all the relevant factors. The four factors that are to be considered in the context of these three conditions are, number one, the appointment of judges. How are judges appointed? Are they appointed based on their merits, on their credentials, on objective elements, or are they appointed based on their political affiliation or friendship or economic influence? Number two, how are the decisions taken? Are they taken based on the applicable law and the facts of the case, or are they taken based on factors outside the merits of the case? Number three, how are judges supervised and disciplined? Is there a procedure established for that, or are there grounds for that, or are there specific reasons established within the law? And number four, how are judges removed? Are they removed at the will of politicians, or are there procedures and grounds to do that? Those four factors are then analyzed in the context of four tools that I want to mention. The first tool is, of course, the theory, the law. How are these four factors handled in theory, in the specific law? But that analysis is contrasted with the reality. In other words, judges, according to the law, are supposed to be appointed in a specific way, but in reality, it occurs in so-and-so way. The second tool is the opinion of relevant stakeholders. Here, what is applicable is the so-called 360-degree analysis, which means that the opinion of all relevant stakeholders is considered. For example, the opinion of the judges, but also the opinion of the lawyers, the opinion of the academia, but also the opinion of the church, the opinion of big companies, the big businesses, but also the opinion of the small businesses, the opinion of the foreign businesses, but also the opinion of the rural businesses, the opinion of the union leaders, but also the opinion of the chambers of commerce and also the international chambers of commerce. That, in a way, gives consistency to the analysis that the expert or the judge is finding out to determine whether there are gaps in that analysis. My time has run out, but I'm going to take a few minutes just to conclude. The third element is relevant cases, emblematic cases where it is widely perceived that the decision has been taken according to factors different from the facts and different from the applicable law. And the fourth tool to be used is the secondary sources. And here I want to stop for a minute, because the secondary sources are very relevant. Secondary sources can be divided into governmental sources, multilateral sources, and then NGA sources, and NGO sources. And NGO sources, we have international and we have national NGOs. Within the governmental sources, we have, in the context of the US, for example, the State Department sources. The State Department produces around 4 reports that somehow relate to lack of judicial independence. The first one is the Human Rights Report, which relates to the existence or non-existence of judicial independence in specific countries in the context of human rights. The second one is the report on terrorism. The third one is the report on narcotics. And the fourth one is the report on commercial guide, which is also reproduced by the Department of Commerce. In addition to the State Department, eventually other governmental organizations within the US produce reports that can be relevant for this purpose, such as USAID or Millennium Challenge Corporation. Even the US Congress eventually issues statements referred to specific crises in the judiciaries of countries, which are relevant in order to validate the opinion that the expert or the judge is shaping up about the specific judiciary. In the U.S., we also have the USTR, the United States Trade Representative Report on non-commercial barriers, on non-trade barriers, which are also relevant for this purpose. Then there are the so-called multilateral sources. In that context, we have the World Bank documents, for example, the so-called global governance indicators, which, although do not specifically relate to judicial independence, there is a factor related to rule of law, and within rule of law there is judicial independence, and hence it's a very important tool to validate the opinion because it looks at how the rule of law of a country is evolving over time, and that's a good tool for comparison. In addition, the World Bank also produces the Index on Judicial Effectiveness, which can also be used to validate the opinion that is shaping up. There are also reports by the United Nations, for example, in the context of the Special Rapporteur on Judicial Independence. Usually there are statements and reports about judicial independence in specific countries, and there are also reports by specific units of the United Nations, such as the Human Development reports, which occasionally deal with judicial independence. The European Union occasionally also issues reports and statements about judicial independence that can be considered for this. And there are a lot of NGOs that somehow deal with issues indirectly related to judicial independence. For example, Transparency International in the area of corruption, or Freedom House in the area of freedom, or Heritage Foundation in the context of economic freedom, or Global Integrity in the context of integrity, or European NGOs such as the Bertelsmann Transformation Index in Germany and in Denmark. And all these tools somehow relate to different issues such as investment climate or competitiveness, etc. But somehow they indirectly they touch as a sub-factor judicial independence, and hence it can be used. In the absence of an indicator in judicial independence, which, as Dr. Rafael Veloz mentioned at the beginning, is one of the initiatives that the Inter-American Bar Association wants to push forward, but so far there is no indicator of judicial independence. In the absence of that, then judges and experts, they need to rely on all these factors. There is a very important tool these days which is called the Index on Rule of Law, produced by the World Justice Project, which, although does not relate specifically to the issue we're speaking about, lack of judicial independence, it somehow deals with that indirectly. In addition to those NGOs, of course, there are local NGOs, specifically those about human rights, that eventually produce reports in this area that can be used for purposes of validating. In conclusion, I just want to say that lack of judicial independence, as you realized, is something that matters, and it matters more and more in an integrated and global world. It is something that is very delicate, but it's something that is measurable. There are tools, judges and experts are using those tools in order to come up with an objective analysis. The challenge, of course, is to do that in an objective way, and as I mentioned before, in the absence of indicators, then judges and experts, they need to rely on the tools that are available out there. But more and more, the trend is shaping up in a way that all the sources and all the tools and conditions that I have mentioned are used in a very consensual way. Lastly, but not less important, of course, lack of judicial independence is important for transnational and international litigation, but it's more important for the citizens of the specific country. And the idea is that once lack of judicial independence can be determined in an objective way, policymakers in those countries can use that tool in order to push forward an agenda of reform. With that, I conclude my presentation, and thank you very much for your patience.